On the morning of June 15, 1944, the first light of dawn struggled to pierce the dense mist hovering over the coral-fringed beaches of a strategic Pacific island. The sand, still wet from the retreating tide, reflected the pale pink and gold streaks of sunlight, while the surrounding palm trees swayed gently in the salty breeze, casting long, wavering shadows across the terrain. Japanese defenders moved silently along the sand dunes and behind reinforced bunkers, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the slow, lumbering landing craft they had been trained to expect. The distant crash of waves against jagged rocks mingled with the occasional call of exotic birds, creating a deceptive sense of calm, one that belied the coming chaos. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the low vegetation made the defenders tense. Every shifting shadow could conceal the approach of enemy troops. Little did they know that the familiar patterns of amphibious assaults would be shattered that day. From the ocean, amphibious DUKWs, waterproof trucks capable of moving seamlessly from surf to sand, emerged like ghosts on the tide, gliding over breaking waves with precision. Troops packed tightly in the vehicles braced themselves, weapons ready, adrenaline surging as they prepared to transform what Japanese planners had considered an impregnable shoreline into a battlefield of unprecedented surprise. The scent of salt water and wet earth mingled with the acrid tang of anticipation and oil from the engines, creating a thick, almost tangible atmosphere of expectancy. Every defensive bunker, every camouflaged machine gun nest, every well-laid minefield seemed to pale in the face of this new tactical innovation. The Japanese, confident in their experience and entrenched positions, could not foresee how these amphibious vehicles would render their carefully calculated defenses obsolete. As the DUKWs crested the final swells of the surf, the stage was set for a spectacle of ingenuity, daring, and the beginning of a landing operation that would redefine amphibious warfare forever. Japanese defenders prepare. Dawn, 1944. By the time the first glimmers of sunlight painted the horizon, the Japanese defenders were fully alert, their senses sharpened by months of patrolling the island's beaches. Along the ridges and reinforced bunkers overlooking the sand, soldiers adjusted the scopes of Type 96 light machine guns and calibrated the barrels of their 75mm artillery, scanning the ocean for any sign of approaching landing craft. Each bunker, a grim concrete testament to months of forced labor and strategic planning, offered a commanding view of the surf, yet the dense morning mist gave the horizon an ethereal, almost deceptive quality. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, a seasoned officer, moved between positions, shouting terse commands as his men double-checked ammunition belts and reinforced sandbags. His sharp eyes flicked constantly to the waterline, calculating timing, distance, and trajectory. Every detail could mean the difference between repelling an attack and catastrophic loss. Confidence ran high. The defenders had repelled smaller patrols before, and the well-placed artillery and mines along the shoreline created a sense of invincibility. The Japanese soldiers, hardened by experience and steeped in doctrine, assumed the enemy would approach in predictable waves, bogged down by the surf and slowed by conventional landing craft. Yet beneath the calm, a subtle tension hung in the air. The distant rise and fall of the waves carried an unfamiliar hum, the low, continuous drone of engines unlike those of the standard Higgins boats they had encountered in past skirmishes. A shadowy silhouette appeared on the horizon, moving with unusual smoothness across the water. Whispers ran through the ranks. Could these be the rumored new amphibious trucks, capable of traversing both water and land? The mist, which had so far concealed the enemy's approach, began to thin, revealing the first DUKWs slicing through the surf with uncanny ease. For the Japanese defenders, the moment of revelation was approaching. Their assumptions about what was possible in amphibious warfare were about to be shattered, and the consequences would be immediate, devastating, and unforgettable. DUKWs hit the beach. Dawn, 1944. As the first golden rays of morning illuminated the rippling waves, a line of DUKWs emerged from the surf, glinting wetly under the rising sun. These amphibious vehicles, sleek and deceptively simple, moved with surprising speed, cutting through the water in perfect formation. Their engines droned steadily, a sound at once mechanical and foreboding, carrying across the beach to the Japanese defenders with an unfamiliar rhythm that immediately drew attention. Soldiers gripping their rifles and machine guns tensed instinctively, anticipating the usual chaos of a traditional landing, but what unfolded was far from ordinary. The DUKWs rode over small breakers, hulls bouncing slightly yet maintaining remarkable stability. Each vehicle carried troops and supplies, ready to deploy as soon as the wheels met sand. For the defenders, the sight was jarring. These boats didn't falter in the surf. They didn't slow with the tide or bog down in mud. They seamlessly transitioned from water to land, moving steadily toward the prepared lines of bunkers and artillery. Riflemen and machine gunners opened fire, sending tracers arcing into the early morning haze. Yet the DUKWs plowed forward with a surprising resilience, their armor deflecting small arms fire while soldiers inside braced and prepared to disembark. On the beach, the first American soldiers leaped from their vehicles, wading onto wet sand that had been carefully mined and rigged for destruction. Explosions rippled through the surf, hurling water and debris into the air, but the DUKWs kept coming, adjusting their approach, dodging obstacles, and maintaining momentum. The Japanese defenders, once confident in their impenetrable line, were thrown into confusion. Their assumptions about timing, terrain, and enemy vulnerability were shattered in real time. What had seemed impossible, landing heavy equipment and troops smoothly across hostile surf, was now an urgent reality unfolding directly before them. The tactical advantage, long presumed to be theirs by the meticulous placement of mines and artillery, was evaporating with every resolute, engine-driven advance of the amphibious invaders. Initial American assault and Japanese confusion, dawn, 1944. As the DUKWs reached the shoreline, their doors swung open and American soldiers poured out in precise, disciplined formations, rifles at the ready. The sand erupted around them with every Japanese bullet that struck, sending sprays of dust and grains into the humid morning air. Despite the chaos, the Americans moved with astonishing coordination, using the vehicles themselves as cover while advancing toward the entrenched positions. Their boots sank slightly into the wet sand, yet each step was measured, purposeful, and terrifyingly effective in the eyes of the stunned Japanese defenders. On the bunkers and ridges above, Japanese soldiers scrambled, their shouts mingling with the booming echoes of small arms fire. Panic flickered across faces that had been trained to repel invasions, but the unpredictable speed and versatility of the DUKWs had thrown their entire defensive strategy into disarray. The defenders had prepared for a traditional landing, slow-moving boats, exposed infantry wading through waist-deep surf, vulnerable to machine gun nests and artillery. What they faced now was something entirely new, troops arriving with protected mobility, striking faster than they could aim or coordinate their counterfire. The Americans exploited every moment of confusion. A squad taking cover behind a DUKW's armored hull fired suppressing rounds, forcing Japanese riflemen to duck and relocate, while another team sprinted across open sand to neutralize a machine gun nest. Smoke from burning beach obstacles mingled with the morning mist, creating a surreal, almost dreamlike haze that masked movements and disoriented the defenders further. Communication between Japanese units broke down as reports of boats on the sand and troops everywhere spread, amplifying fear and uncertainty. In those crucial first minutes, the psychological advantage swung decisively to the Americans. The Japanese had underestimated not only the ingenuity of the amphibious vehicles, but also the coordinated training of the soldiers who deployed from them. The initial assault, combining speed, surprise, and the protective advantage of the DUKWs, left the defenders reeling, struggling to adapt in real time to a tactical nightmare that shattered their assumptions of invincibility. By the time the first small bunkers fell, the beach itself had become a chaotic theater of innovation, courage, and raw adaptive skill, an impossible victory made possible by technology, training, and relentless determination. Securing the beachhead and suppressing resistance. Morning, 1944. Once the first waves of DUKWs had safely delivered their troops onto the beach, the Americans didn't pause. They surged forward with precision, each soldier acutely aware that the Japanese defenders were regrouping for a desperate counterattack. The sand, churned and littered with debris from destroyed obstacles, became a dangerous landscape of footfalls, gunfire, and smoke. Machine gun nests crackled intermittently, but the combination of mobile cover, suppressive fire, and rapid coordination allowed American squads to neutralize threats before the defenders could mount a concentrated defense. From the vantage of Japanese bunkers, panic intensified. Riflemen and artillery crews fired frantically, yet the waves of DUKW-delivered troops seemed endless. Each vehicle's armored sides allowed soldiers to take calculated cover, exposing only enough of themselves to deliver accurate and deadly fire. Mortar teams were forced to relocate as their positions were pinned down by sharpshooters moving methodically across the sand. The battlefield was alive with motion, smoke curling from spent rounds, sand kicked high by explosions, and the sun glinting off polished bayonets and glimmering rifle barrels. Tactical discipline shone as American squads communicated through hand signals and shouted orders, coordinating advances to encircle remaining defensive positions. Engineers and demolition teams moved in tandem, clearing mines and sabotaged obstacles, ensuring that the momentum of the landing was maintained. The Japanese, still reeling from the speed and unpredictability of the amphibious assault, struggled to form cohesive counterattacks, their morale crumbling under the relentless, synchronized pressure. By mid-morning, a clear perimeter began to emerge. The beach, once a deadly gauntlet for any landing force, had been transformed into a secure foothold. Troops moved with cautious optimism, securing captured positions, tending to wounded, and preparing for the next phase of the advance inland. The DUKWs, having proved their strategic worth, were already returning to the surf to ferry reinforcements and supplies. The amphibious innovation that the Japanese had dismissed as minor or inconsequential had now decisively tipped the scales, turning what should have been a brutal, near-impossible landing into a series of calculated victorious maneuvers that shocked the defenders and redefined the possibilities of beach assaults. Flanking Japanese defenses and expanding the beachhead, late morning, 1944. As the first waves of DUKW-delivered troops consolidated their positions along the beach, American commanders quickly recognized the need to outmaneuver the remaining Japanese strongpoints rather than confronting them head-on. Orders crackled through field radios, and small squads fanned out to flank the entrenched positions, moving with deliberate precision across the scarred, sand-strewn terrain. Smoke from burning barricades and the hiss of incoming artillery filled the air, but the soldiers pressed on, using dunes, wrecked obstacles, and the armored sides of DUKWs as mobile cover. From their vantage points, Japanese defenders strained to track the advancing Americans. Their bunkers, once commanding the beach, were suddenly vulnerable to coordinated enfilading fire. Soldiers firing from the flanks and rear forced gunners into blind panic, their carefully laid fields of fire disrupted by these unexpected angles. Explosions from strategically placed grenades and demolition charges tore through sandbags and light fortifications, shattering what little cohesion remained in the Japanese lines. The DUKWs themselves became crucial instruments in this flanking maneuver. Their amphibious versatility allowed engineers and infantry to traverse shallow inlets and side channels, landing behind enemy positions and cutting off retreat routes. Each vehicle disgorged fresh troops with surgical timing, reinforcing squads already pressing from the front. Troop movements were fluid and continuous, a living tide that kept the Japanese guessing, retreating, and eventually abandoning well-fortified posts in disorder. Amidst the chaos, officers coordinated artillery and mortars to suppress remaining enemy fire, while forward observers marked targets for precise strikes. The combination of mobility, surprise, and relentless pressure eroded the defensive perimeter, turning a beach once thought nearly impregnable into a continuously expanding foothold. By late morning, American forces had not only secured the original landing zone but were actively advancing inland, forcing the Japanese to regroup behind secondary lines. The once feared fortifications along the coast had been outflanked and neutralized, demonstrating how innovative amphibious tactics, embodied by the DUKWs, transformed what had been impossible landings into a series of decisive, coordinated victories. Reinforcements and supply lines via DUKWs, midday, 1944. As the American beachhead solidified, the relentless task of sustaining the momentum fell on the amphibious DUKWs. These dual-purpose vehicles, half-truck and half-boat, churned through shallow surf and churned sand, delivering critical reinforcements and supplies to the front lines. Crates of ammunition, bundles of medical supplies, and fresh squads of infantry were unloaded almost seamlessly, their arrival synchronized with the ebb and flow of the battle. The roar of engines, the slap of water against metal hulls, and the screech of tank treads against the beach blended into a rhythmic symphony of controlled chaos. From the rear, Japanese observers could only watch in disbelief as what had seemed like a tenuous foothold transformed into an ever-strengthening offensive. DUKWs darted around wrecked obstacles and scattered minefields, often under sporadic rifle and machine gun fire, yet they proved nearly untouchable, amphibious mobility rendering most defensive positions ineffective. Troops riding the DUKWs remained tense but disciplined, gripping their weapons as they rolled forward, their faces set with determination and focus. At the landing zone, officers orchestrated a seamless ballet of unloading and deployment. Soldiers streamed off the DUKWs directly into coordinated formations, immediately joining the front lines, reinforcing flanks, and plugging gaps exposed by earlier skirmishes. Each delivery was more than just material support. It was a psychological blow to the Japanese defenders, who began to perceive the beach not as a single vulnerable landing but as a continuously reinforced, expanding bastion of American power. Medical personnel too rode the DUKWs back to the beachhead, evacuating wounded soldiers under fire, the vehicle's armor and speed providing the crucial edge between life and death. Engineers and demolition teams followed close behind, using the mobility of the DUKWs to clear obstacles, repair damaged landing points, and construct makeshift pathways for heavier equipment. The beach transformed into a dynamic hub of activity, amphibious supply lines functioning with military precision, feeding the relentless push inland. By late afternoon, the DUKWs had proven their decisive role in maintaining the offensive's tempo. Reinforcements were continuously flowing, supplies never faltered, and Japanese forces were increasingly outmaneuvered, their positions systematically neutralized by a combination of tactical ingenuity and mechanical superiority. The amphibious vehicles, once underestimated as mere transport, had become a lifeline, a force multiplier, and a symbol of how ingenuity could turn the seemingly impossible into repeatable victories on hostile shores. Inland push and overcoming counterattacks, midday to late afternoon, 1944. With the beachhead firmly secured by relentless waves of DUKWs, American forces began their cautious yet unstoppable push inland. Soldiers advanced through flattened dunes and broken vegetation, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder, salt, and sweat. Each squad moved with disciplined precision, clearing foxholes, machine gun nests, and concealed pillboxes that had once seemed impenetrable. The constant hum of engines, the distant staccato of small arms, and the occasional boom of artillery punctuated the tense rhythm of the advance. Japanese forces, initially paralyzed by the shock of the amphibious landings, regrouped for desperate counterattacks. Mortar fire rained down sporadically, and sporadic charges tested the American lines, but the reinforcements and supplies flowing steadily from the DUKWs kept morale high and fatigue at bay. Soldiers ducked behind the remains of barricades, traded suppressive fire, and coordinated flanking movements, neutralizing the enemy before they could regain momentum. Smoke and dust hung low in the air, giving the battlefield an almost ethereal, otherworldly quality, as men and machines moved in a synchronized push through the chaos. Tank and artillery support emerged from the beachhead, following the infantry and cutting through stubborn resistance. Sherman tanks rumbled across churned earth, their cannons blasting fortified positions, while DUKWs continued to ferry reinforcements to precarious positions, ensuring that the American advance never stalled. Each successful engagement bolstered the soldiers' confidence, reinforcing the notion that the landing was not a temporary foothold but the first step in a larger, unstoppable offensive. From the Japanese perspective, the inland push was a nightmare of coordination and firepower. Every attempt to reclaim lost ground was met with relentless American determination and the logistical marvel of amphibious supply lines. Soldiers who had once underestimated the landings now faced a constant barrage of men and material, as if the beach itself were feeding the advancing army with endless resources. By late afternoon, the inland advance had transformed from a tentative maneuver into a sustained, methodical campaign. The DUKW's contribution was unmistakable, not merely as transport, but as lifelines that made each push possible, each counterattack survivable, and each objective achievable. The American forces moved as a single cohesive entity, turning the impossible amphibious landings into a blueprint for operational success. One beach, one obstacle, and one victory at a time. Securing strategic points and consolidating gains. Late afternoon, 1944. As the sun began its slow descent over the Pacific coastline, the American forces shifted from rapid inland advance to deliberate consolidation of newly gained territory. Key ridges, road junctions, and small villages were secured, each becoming a linchpin for future operations. Soldiers moved cautiously, combing the terrain for hidden threats, spider holes, camouflaged bunkers, and snipers that could strike from the dense undergrowth. The once chaotic battlefield now carried an organized, methodical rhythm, a testament to the discipline and planning that had made the DUKW-supported landings so effective. DUKWs continued to play a vital role, ferrying ammunition, rations, and medical supplies directly to forward positions. The amphibious trucks became lifelines, gliding through shallow streams and mud-laden paths, ensuring that every squad could maintain pressure on the enemy without pausing for logistical support. The engineers moved alongside, reinforcing captured positions with sandbags, improvised barricades, and improvised observation posts, turning temporary footholds into defensible strongpoints. Japanese defenders, still reeling from the shock of the beach landings and the relentless inland push, attempted counterattacks at strategic points. Small groups launched sudden ambushes along narrow paths, hoping to sever supply lines and isolate forward units. But every attempt was met with coordinated American fire, flanking maneuvers, and rapid resupply from the DUKWs. The psychological advantage lay firmly with the attackers. The visible, constant flow of men, material, and armored support made resistance seem futile. By late afternoon, the strategic map of the battlefield was transforming. Hills once overlooked became observation posts, crossroads turned into command centers, villages were fortified, allowing infantry, artillery, and DUKWs to operate in synchrony. The land itself, previously a defensive advantage for the Japanese, was now being systematically dominated by American forces. The combination of rapid movement, careful consolidation, and relentless logistical support showcased how amphibious operations could transform the tide of war, turning what once seemed like a perilous landing into a platform for sustained offensive success. The soldiers on the ground felt a sense of cautious triumph. Each hill secured, each village fortified, and each supply line maintained reinforced the idea that the impossible amphibious landings had not only succeeded but could now serve as a staging ground for even larger operations. The battlefield, once chaotic and uncertain, was gradually reshaping into a controlled environment, where American innovation, discipline, and the unmatched versatility of the DUKWs dictated the pace of the campaign. Overcoming Japanese counterattacks and expanding the perimeter. Early evening, 1944. As the evening sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson, American forces faced their next test: Japanese counterattacks designed to reclaim lost ground and sever supply lines. The once chaotic jungle paths and muddy roads became stages of tense confrontation, where every shadow could conceal a hidden enemy soldier or an ambush waiting to strike. From behind hastily constructed barricades, American squads scanned the treeline, M1 Garand and Browning automatic rifles at the ready, their eyes sharp for movement amidst the dense foliage. DUKWs continued to prove their worth, shuttling reinforcements and ammunition directly to the front lines despite the looming threat of mortar fire or sniper attacks. Engineers, often under direct enemy fire, reinforced captured positions with sandbags and trenches, ensuring that the perimeter could withstand repeated Japanese assaults. Small groups of Japanese soldiers attempted night raids, slipping through undergrowth and attempting to outflank American squads, but disciplined American defensive fire, coordinated patrols, and rapid reinforcement from amphibious trucks met each attempt with precision. The clash of tactics and technology was evident. While Japanese forces relied on stealth, surprise, and intimate knowledge of the terrain, the Americans leveraged mobility, firepower, and logistical supremacy. Every successful repelled attack allowed the perimeter to expand, turning once tentative footholds into formidable defensive zones. Observation posts on hills and rooftops now communicated via runners and radio signals, coordinating overlapping fields of fire that caught enemy attackers in crossfires, diminishing their morale and effectiveness. By nightfall, the American perimeter had grown substantially. Villages, ridges, and vital road junctions once fiercely contested were now firmly under control, connected seamlessly by the continuous supply chain provided by DUKWs. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was palpable. The relentless advance, the seemingly inexhaustible stream of men and materials, and the inability to disrupt supply lines eroded the confidence that had once fueled their resistance. As darkness enveloped the battlefield, patrols continued cautiously along the extended perimeter, ensuring that no counterattack could breach the newly established lines. Fires burned low in cleared areas, silhouetting advancing troops and amphibious vehicles, their headlights cutting through the twilight. The DUKWs, now symbols of both mobility and persistence, glided steadily through shallow streams and muddy tracks, silently reinforcing positions and enabling the American forces to maintain momentum. The success of these operations demonstrated how tactical coordination, innovative use of technology, and relentless pressure could turn a vulnerable beachhead into a secure launchpad for further advances. Each repelled attack and expanded perimeter was a testament not only to courage under fire but to the seamless integration of logistics, infantry, and amphibious assets, showing that what once seemed like an impossible landing could evolve into a controlled and unstoppable offensive campaign. Linking up with inland forces and expanding the beachhead, late afternoon, 1944. By late afternoon, the golden light of the sun cast long, sharp shadows over the mud-slicked beachhead. American DUKWs continued their relentless rhythm, ferrying troops, artillery, and vital supplies from the landing zones to forward positions. The roar of engines mingled with distant bursts of small arms fire and the intermittent boom of artillery, creating a symphony of war that echoed across the tropical landscape. Inland forces, having fought their way through dense jungle and fortified positions, now emerged to link with the beachhead, bringing cohesion and strength to the tenuous foothold that had once seemed so vulnerable. The convergence of beach and inland units was meticulously coordinated. Scouts and patrols moved ahead, clearing paths through thick vegetation and checking for hidden traps, while machine gun teams set up overlapping fields of fire to protect the advancing columns. The DUKWs, now loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements, navigated narrow riverbeds and mud-choked tracks with remarkable precision, bringing support exactly where it was needed most. The sight of American forces converging from sea and land was a psychological blow to Japanese defenders, who had expected the isolated beachhead to be easily contained or destroyed. As the two forces linked, command posts established on higher ground began issuing coordinated orders. Artillery teams adjusted fire to suppress enemy positions ahead, while infantry squads pushed forward, using the momentum of reinforcements to overwhelm remaining pockets of resistance. Japanese defenders, often entrenched in bunkers or hidden behind dense foliage, were caught between the advancing beachhead and the inland forces, forcing them into hasty retreats or desperate counterattacks that were met with disciplined fire. The beachhead, once a fragile foothold vulnerable to isolation and counterattack, now became a launchpad for further inland operations. DUKWs glided along flooded tracks and shallow streams, their flatbeds carrying vital supplies that allowed engineers to repair roads, build bridges, and construct defensive positions. The rhythm of movement, amphibious vehicles, infantry, artillery, and reconnaissance teams demonstrated the seamless integration of American tactical doctrine with innovative logistics. By evening, the perimeter had expanded several kilometers inland, linking the beachhead firmly with the broader operational front. Fires from skirmishes dotted the landscape, illuminating smoke rising from previously contested positions, while American soldiers regrouped and prepared for the night. The coordinated push had not only secured key terrain but also shattered Japanese expectations, showing that what they had believed to be an impossible amphibious landing could evolve into a well-organized and unstoppable advance. The successful link-up exemplified the combination of courage, innovation, and logistics that had made DUKWs indispensable. With the beachhead connected to inland forces, The Americans were poised to transform a contested shoreline into a stable, sustainable front, setting the stage for continued offensives that would keep Japanese defenders perpetually on the back foot. Holding the perimeter and preparing for the next phase. Twilight, 1944. As twilight settled over the newly expanded beachhead, shadows stretched long across the churned earth, giving the impression of a world caught between day and night, calm and chaos. The Americans had secured a strong perimeter, but vigilance remained paramount. Soldiers moved cautiously along hastily constructed defensive positions, checking sandbags, barbed wire, and small artillery emplacements. The rhythmic hum of DUKWs returning from supply runs punctuated the tense quiet, each vehicle carrying vital ammunition, rations, and reinforcements to ensure the front lines remained secure. Commanders coordinated the night strategy with meticulous precision. Observers in elevated positions scanned the dense jungle edges for any signs of Japanese counterattacks, while radio operators relayed intelligence from reconnaissance teams navigating inland trails. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair damaged roads and erect temporary watchtowers, understanding that control of the terrain would determine the success of upcoming operations. Every detail mattered. Every barricade, every patrol, every round of ammunition could tip the balance between survival and disaster. From the shadows of the jungle, the occasional flash of movement reminded soldiers that Japanese forces were not entirely defeated. Snipers, small squads, and hidden machine gun nests posed constant threats, keeping troops on high alert. Yet, the Americans' combined arms approach, supported by DUKWs ferrying men and supplies, created a network of strength that Japanese forces could not easily penetrate. The seamless integration of amphibious logistics, infantry maneuvers, and artillery support had transformed the once vulnerable landing into a fortified launch point. As night deepened, small fires dotted the beachhead, marking areas where engineers and soldiers continued their work under the dim glow of lanterns and headlights. Supply teams offloaded crates, while medics tended to the wounded, and officers plotted the next phase of the campaign. The atmosphere was a mixture of tense anticipation and quiet determination, the knowledge that tomorrow's operations could be even more critical weighing heavily on every soldier's mind. The successful holding of the perimeter not only preserved the beachhead, but also showcased the remarkable adaptability of the American forces. Japanese defenders, who had expected the initial landing to falter under concentrated fire or logistical challenges, now faced an entrenched and well-supplied enemy. The DUKWs had turned impossible amphibious landings into a sustainable and repeatable advantage, allowing the Americans to project force inland with unprecedented efficiency. By the end of the night, the beachhead stood as a testament to meticulous planning, bravery, and innovation. Soldiers prepared for dawn, knowing that the next phase of the campaign would demand courage and precision, but confident that the lessons learned and the systems established during the first days of landing had set them on a path to victory. The DUKWs, the coordination, and the perseverance of the troops had transformed a perilous operation into a strategically decisive foothold, setting the stage for a relentless inland advance. Post-landing analysis and legacy of DUKWs, morning after the assault, 1944. The first light of dawn illuminated the expansive beachhead, revealing the true scale of the operation. Muddy tracks crisscrossed the sand, marking the paths of countless DUKWs that had ferried troops, supplies, and artillery to the shore under fire. Scattered remnants of the Japanese defense, destroyed fortifications, abandoned weapons, and smoldering bunkers, spoke volumes about the ferocity and effectiveness of the amphibious assault. Commanders and strategists gathered atop small dunes and elevated positions, observing the perimeter and analyzing the battlefield with maps, binoculars, and hand-drawn overlays. Reports were exchanged briskly, each officer aware that the landing had not only succeeded but had exceeded expectations. DUKWs had proved their worth in a way that many skeptics had dismissed. Vehicles that could traverse both water and rough terrain had ensured that American forces were continuously reinforced and supplied, turning what the Japanese considered impossible landings into operational victories. Charts and diagrams highlighted the unprecedented rate at which men, ammunition, and heavy equipment had reached the front lines, illustrating the logistical genius behind amphibious warfare. Veteran soldiers shared accounts of the chaos and confusion inflicted upon Japanese defenders, noting how the relentless arrival of reinforcements via DUKWs broke the cohesion of enemy positions. Interviews with squad leaders and medics painted a vivid picture of soldiers advancing inland with confidence, supported by a lifeline of supplies and firepower that made the beachhead resilient against counterattacks. Engineers and mechanics, who had repaired vehicles under fire, were acknowledged for their role in keeping the supply chain flowing without pause. Historical analysts emphasized the transformative effect of DUKWs on amphibious operations. These vehicles had redefined what was possible in wartime logistics, allowing forces to bypass natural and man-made obstacles that had previously slowed or doomed landings. Maps overlaid with the paths of DUKWs and the progression of infantry highlighted how operational tempo had been maintained, enabling rapid inland advances and reducing casualties. The ability to project power across both water and land had not only given the Americans a tactical edge but had fundamentally shifted Japanese expectations of defensive warfare. The scene shifted to a more reflective tone, soldiers resting, cleaning weapons, and taking stock of the fallen and the wounded. Quiet conversations spoke of relief, determination, and respect for the technology and planning that had made the operation successful. The DUKWs, once doubted and dismissed, now stood as icons of ingenuity and adaptability, their amphibious capabilities turning logistical nightmares into operational triumphs. As the morning sun rose higher, illuminating the beach and jungle beyond, it was clear that the lessons of the landing would resonate far beyond this single campaign. The DUKWs had not only carried men and material, they had carried the seeds of a new approach to combined arms operations, demonstrating that coordination, innovation, and adaptability could overcome even the most formidable defenses. The Japanese, once confident in their control of the islands, now faced a new reality. The Americans had rewritten the rules of amphibious warfare, and the legacy of the DUKW would echo through every subsequent landing in the Pacific theater. In the aftermath, military historians would note the operation as a turning point in logistical and tactical thinking. The success of the beachhead underscored that technology, when paired with strategy and courage, could achieve what had once seemed impossible. The DUKWs had transformed the nightmare of amphibious landings into a repeatable formula for victory, forever altering the calculus of Pacific warfare.